Thank you very much. You are so gifted. Our next speaker is Mr. Zaid Ibrahim. Zaid is heading the group strategy, policy coordination and relations in the city. He is leading a very strategic function within the organization, such as he heads strategy planning. He's the custodian of the policy coordination and the head of the intergovernmental relations. By the way, a very intelligent young man who has assumed the position of our chief strategist in the city. So Zaid will walk us through the city strategic planning processes, focusing on the integrated development plan, the ITP, the service delivery and the budget implementation plan, the STPIP. These are critical tools for ensuring that municipal services meet the expectations of our citizens as provided for in the Constitution and the local government legislation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ibrahim. And Zaid, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, good. Well, it's still good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm not sure who is in there, Program Director, Acting EM, in absentia, CM, others who are part of it, members of the boards. colleagues from the city of Johannesburg and everywhere else, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll try to stick to 15 minutes, but normally we always present with a lot of abbreviations, so when I explain that, it takes a lot more time than 15 minutes. So whether it's GDS, IDP, CBP, GSPCR, GH, this, that, these are all the abbreviations we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So please bear with me if I skip through a couple of them here and there. I'm going to talk about our long-term strategy and how it's formed into our IDP, and essentially what needs to be considered by the boards, by members of the boards, when we think about how we go through these particular processes, particularly starting from our IDP, which we've seen on the title slide, is known as the People's Plan. The IDP, and why we call it the People's Plan, simply explained, is about really how we want to collaborate with our citizens, how we develop that document that reflects their needs, their aspirations, building the trust and fostering accountability, ensuring that that plan represents the voices of people on the ground for that particular purpose, for that particular time frame as well. It's also about prioritizing our basic needs like water, electricity, waste management, and improving the lives or quality of lives of all our residents. Focusing on delivering services that make a tangible difference in everyday life is absolutely crucial. And that's because the strategy and how it's broken down into the IDP, implemented, and how it's funded is absolutely crucial in getting us towards that destination, which we'll talk to as well. So it's about us going beyond just the immediate challenges to transform Johannesburg and propel it into the next level of what that development is all about. So we really, through our strategic planning process, want to and need to encourage every resident to take ownership of what that means, and essentially promoting accountability and actively ensuring that they participate in these particular processes. Now, we start up with these processes through community-based planning sessions, CBP sessions, and that's where a number of people come together in terms of providing their inputs and their voices into these particular processes. I'm not going to talk through all the details because what is coming through is essentially a reflection of what is the IDP all about. People said they wanted types of development where it reflected the needs of the places in which they lived. At various times when we look at Johannesburg as an unequal city spatially, this is a fascinating example of why and how we need to be responsive in a multidimensional manner, in an integrated manner. And that's partly why this IDP and our strategic planning processes do see us in that regard as well. Now, I'm not going to talk through some of this information because I will get into it in some of the details, but from where and what we've received from communities and the inputs and how it is reflected into the budgets and the IDPs is essentially what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to go through essentially what Johannesburg's about and why it's important that we continuously understand this evolution of the city in the way in which we see it. We see ourselves as a city of about 6 or so million people. Stats SA sees it a little bit differently, but nevertheless, you might have heard that some of the data that's come out of Stats SA is a little bit undercounted, let's put it that way. So we're about 6 million people. There are over 2 million households in Johannesburg. Our access to service delivery is in the 90s across, the average metrics combined. Formal dwellings at about 90%, water at 98.3%, electricity 94.1%, sanitation 93%, and refuse 90%. Now that's just setting the basis for where we are now, moving towards what should be 100% for everyone, whether there are 6 million people or more in the city of Johannesburg. Johannesburg is significant in that it contributes about 16% to the national GDP, and about 2.7% has been the growth rate over the last period as well. Unemployment's a huge concern. Youth unemployment is approximately 46.5%, and poverty is almost 51%. That's almost 1 in every 2 people are living below the poverty line in the city. Though there are some positive indicators, human development is fairly high. That's 0.71. Quality of life is also relatively good. It's over 60 at 62%. Inequality still remains a concern. We are one of the most unequal cities in the world, if not the most unequal country in the world as well, with the Gini coefficient at 0.6. And that's indicative of a number of particular trajectories that when you analyze it through the kind of path dependence of why we are an unequal city today and what that means physically, it needs to be responded to in a particularly integrated way as well. Now, how we do that is through the Joburg 2040 strategy. Our long-term strategy, Joburg 2040, has been there since October 20th, 2011, if I'm not mistaken, and remains the pinnacle strategy for Johannesburg in driving its forward-looking agenda. We are almost halfway into the implementation of the GDS, and as we know, becoming a world-class African city is a multifaceted aspect. We have to ensure that when we're looking at becoming resilient, sustainable, livable, the ability to recover quickly, the ability to balance and find an equilibrium between the natural and the man-made, and to ensure that well-being, a quality of life is worthwhile. Those three things about being resilient, sustainable, and livable need to be a reminder again as to what this long-term strategy actually means. Now, how we look at the base of it, from the human and social to the governance, to the economic growth and the environment and services functions, are particularly how the strategy needs to work in an integrated fashion. And that's where the organization is geared towards that, but also will need to be geared up further to take this to the next 15 years of development for Johannesburg as well. We implement the long-term strategy through our 5-year IDP, which we review, and that is basically broken down into the business plans that are dealt with on an annual basis. Those who are in boards and chairpersons of boards will know that somewhere around April and May, we will be putting a lot of pressure on these particular entities to ensure that these business plans are aligned to what's in the IDP, the Joburg 2040 strategy, but also the needs of our community-based planning processes, because that's where, on an annual basis, we drive that particular form of development as well. Achieving a world-class African city means that we need to take those outcomes of our long-term strategy and how they work in terms of our IDP and our priorities and how we implement them as well is absolutely crucial. There are 11 priorities in the city of Johannesburg, which I'm not really going to go through them right now, but the outcomes of our long-term strategy are broken down into outputs. It's like goals and objectives in some way, in terms of getting us towards our vision. These outputs are what we need to do more frequently on an everyday basis so that we achieve the outcome which ultimately achieves the kind of impact we want in terms of the long-term sort of frameworks and strategic planning ideas that we have in Johannesburg. Now, this roadmap is crucial. Many would remember in 2011 when the Joburg 2040 strategy was out there, that we needed to break this down into a roadmap that said, what will you actually do in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? How do you tie in to the NDP in 2030? How do you look at the Sustainable Development Goals? How do you move beyond, at that time, the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals? And what are the kind of things you need to do? And after you initiate the strategy, how do you become more responsive? How do you accelerate? And how do you strategize implementation so that what you ultimately do, which is the last aspect of this roadmap, is to really consolidate your gains. Now, have we done that? Are we going in the right direction? Are these particular timeframes exactly what we were looking at? How do we measure long-term in the context of short-term? How do we, balance these competing needs? Are fundamentally what we ask ourselves every single day in terms of, driving this particular agenda as well. So there are the 11 priorities. I'll unpack them in a little bit more detail as well. But what's crucial in terms of this document is how we align strategy to planning. Conceptually, we have what's known as the house, as a conceptual framework in terms of our IDP. At the foundation, which is essentially what we all have to do, is quality, efficient, smart service delivery. Getting us there in terms of the pillars of driving that strategy and aligning it to how we need to plan is about spatial and societal transformation. How do we look at new economic pathways? How do we connect with communities? And how do we become a smart city? And at the top of it is, how do you communicate that? And how do you look at the kind of development that is reflective of what you need to do in that regard? So aiming for that sort of brighter tomorrow means that you've got to take these particular pillars and foundationally use that to hold up what you want as the roof. And that's really to make sure that everything below that is kept intact in doing that. So it's a very simple metaphor, but it's useful in terms of understanding why we need to align these strategic planning processes. I'm not going to go through all the details of what it means. I think that's pretty straightforward, but there are a number of strategies in Johannesburg, and many of the particular entities or board chairpersons or board members will have to confront and deal with many of the issues that are strategically located at a more functional or operational level. So the IDP is an amalgamation of various strategies across the organization. As we see within the different priorities, there are a number of other strategies that guide particular areas of development and how we need to drive that going forward as well. Crucially, how those strategies form key performance indicators that are essentially target-driven drive us towards what would be in those particular business plans that you will be dealing with, approving, interrogating, reflecting on, and whatever else. And I think those are already there. So that's the starting point for what the strategic focus needs to be taken into. I'm not going to go through too many of the intergovernmental issues because we work we work across, within an intergovernmental framework, and there's legislative sort of expectation, and we do work within the broader confines of government and its planning processes, and of course in the context of the GNU and that alignment. So all these work streams are simultaneously occurring where we aligning what we're finding from national, provincial, into what is coming through at the metro level, at the provincial, at the sort of cross-metro, and even at the global level to a large extent. But our district development model and the one plan is also work that you'll hear coming through that we're doing and trying to align and make sure that what we are working with and where we are working, and because government, we all plan in the same place and we all tend to plan for the same purpose, same place, but we need to coordinate that a lot better. And the district development model is one approach that we're using, and I mean, I'm not going to talk through what it essentially implies and why it's that crucial, but there are, the different components, aspects, and areas of alignment that we need to make sure fits in. So when we look at our own priorities in Johannesburg, when we look at what is expected of us when we align across government, and when we look at what we need to deliver on the ground, these things have to be seamless. And that is then how you upscale your strategic direction and implementation as well. So I'm not going to talk too much about the district development model. Some of our commitments are still being worked out across province and national government in terms of why we need to drive particular projects and processes in those particular spaces and places. But it's important that you understand, when we get into the actual strategy of this document, of the IDP, that when we look at aspects of financial sustainability, matters around billing, revenue management, enhancing financial compliance, enhancing financial viability, our liquidity position, etc., become crucial drivers and become the basis of how we will then derive and deliver on our long-term strategy. But the other priority of an energy mix means that we've got to look at beyond what we would ordinarily see. The Joburg 2040 strategy already in 2011 set out a number of guiding principles, we could say, for how we need to diversify our energy mix. Today we're now talking about the sustainable energy strategy at City Power, some of the small-scale embedded generation, the batteries, the solar, etc., in terms of also combating load shedding and some of the other challenges that have emerged over the last sort of almost decade and a half now. In terms of sustainable service delivery, those backlogs, even though they might look like 2 or 3%, etc., are significant. 2% of people who don't have water might amount to a couple of 100,000 people, or whatever it might mean for electricity, and especially from the housing or the human settlement sort of point of view as well, what those backlogs mean. If you have continuous human settlements backlogs, it fundamentally means you have a backlog in electricity, water, and everything else. So you've got to see and understand backlogs very differently in the context of how you deliver in that particular space. So we talk about our initiatives around water, sanitation, electricity, waste, visible service delivery, separation of its source, as we spoke about earlier, and new ways of looking at innovating around service delivery. We have to move to the point where we are leapfrogging at the same time as delivering. Where there is and where there isn't fundamentally puts us with a serious question of how do we incentivize a different type of development as well from a service delivery point of view. Similarly, from an infrastructure development and refurbishment point of view, what are the initiatives around planning, housing, the inner city, which has been very topical over the last 2 years, if not long. I mean, obviously, given the recent disasters, but for the last 30 years, the inner city of Johannesburg has been on this agenda, and how do we upscale what this now means as an integrated living, working, and a switchboard of all sorts of connectivity in our city as well. So the human settlements ideas and initiatives and the work between balancing informality, formality, and of course mobility is fundamental to understanding this aspect of our priorities as well. There are obviously the priorities. When I mean PIP, I forgot to mention that means Priority Implementation Plan, as an abbreviation. Good governance. I mean issues around fraud, corruption, theft of assets, maladministration, but also from a personnel point of view, employment equity, getting the right skills, the right people for the right purpose, and of course, understanding and managing risk is crucial to some of the governance aspects. And that's notwithstanding all the other things that give us an understanding of what governance is all about. Economically, how do we upscale our work around job creation, revitalization of the township economy, and skills development as well, which is as important economically as it is to the organization from a governance point of view as well. From a safer city point of view, I mean, we talk about disasters and the way in which disasters are becoming more stark, more sharper, more unpredictable, more uncertain. How do we then obviously deal with some of those aspects of building safer communities, building safer infrastructure to ensure that we're not just safeguarding infrastructure today, but it's also a sustainability aspect. So safety and sustainability are non-negotiable fundamentals as well. Furthermore, active and engaged citizenry, we talk about issues around community-based planning, enhancing that community engagement, bringing through the voices of those who participate in our processes to have a say in their development. A couple of years ago, we looked at co-production, Josie at Work, a number of those initiatives which actually took Johannesburg to a different level of how service delivery is jointly created between communities and the city. It's normally a one-way street. If we look at service delivery being, championed only by the state. But if we look at a co-production model, which is fundamentally the basis of an active and engaged citizenry, it's how do those skills and resources from communities start influencing the way in which they take care of their own environments and how we support and facilitate that. So that's also partly covered in what that priority means. Broadly, on a more sustainable economic growth trajectory, I mean, that's an underlying factor from our long-term economic and local economic development planning to investment retention to the kind of investments you want. How then do we look at regional economic profiling in the context of the province, nationally, globally, continentally? The economic focus, I think, is something that Johannesburg, it's a non-negotiable in Johannesburg given its own stature as well. Issues around the environment, climate change, air quality, environmental sustainability, biodiversity, rehabilitation of rivers, etc., are equally as crucial to consider. And we are in an age of artificial intelligence and new ideas and just being smarter. And the smart city idea, which has really been sort of embedded in the organization for a number of years, must look at bringing about how do we transform Joburg to be 24/7? How do we look at digitalizing the services that we offer and engaging with communities on a far different level. So connecting through the smart city idea is not just a technological and technological sort of aspect of it, but it's a very human component that we're also trying to bring into it, from the skill side and the mobility side and a number of other aspects as well. So I'm not going to go through too much of the spatial development framework. I think fundamentally how we restructure our city is fundamental to understanding why and how we deal with, what we've inherited as perhaps one of the most unequal spatial cities in the world, and it's a South African phenomena as well. But what then does this post-apartheid urbanism actually mean? Why are we looking to restructure, and how do we find ways in which corridors and other forms of spatial connectivity bridges the spatial divide? Because then it changes the fundamental human and other conditions as well that go with it. But that's a lecture for another day probably. I'm not going to go through too much of it, but really just to focus on the fact that our deprivation map tells us where we need to actually focus on our development. Why within these regions where inequality, where poverty, where unemployment is at its worst, do we need to focus on the most? And why then, which is a very crucial slide, which I'm going to talk through. I mean, we talk about Ivory Park, Orange Farm, Kliptown, Southern Farms, the inner city transformation areas. I'm just trying to hope that this keeps up with that. And that when we look at our budgets, I'm just trying to get there to the right slide, that this important point of 60% of the CAPEX budget will be spent on infrastructure development, refurbishment, and sustainable delivery, sustainable service delivery, but the majority of the budget is in the deprived areas. And that argument and that narrative is not just about problematizing the same thing, it's about actually genuinely transforming those initiatives going into the future. And this is why, when we look at where that 60% will be spent and how much over the next medium term or 3 years or so, tells you that there's a particular story of Johannesburg that has to basically deal with matters of transformation over time as well. And our CAPEX funding, as you can see, these are the particular types of projects for these particular types of departments and entities. I think many board members will have to get quite familiar with it, but that's 7.2 billion of that CAPEX for this year. 21 billion over the next 3 years will be spent in these areas over the next sort of period. And you can see what types of projects and the scale at which some of these projects are also going to be undertaken. So you can correlate now deprivation and funding, and why and how the long-term strategy actually talks about a particular type of initiative that has to be built in that paradigm of what Johannesburg will mean. So the principles of what's in the GDS, the kind of 6 areas that we always talked about spatial justice, environmental sustainability, has to correlate with this story. And that's a fundamental aspect of our strategic planning direction in Johannesburg. I'm not going to talk too much about regionally, how we allocate budgets and all sorts of things. I'm not going to even go through our 56 KPIs because that's really quite a long sort of story. I'll leave it at this point, Program Director, because I think the important aspect is when you go through these indicators, I can just sort of flight through the 60 or 55 indicators, they have to reflect everything we said in the plan. They have to reflect the long-term strategy. They have to break down what the ultimate impact might be and how that is driven on an annual basis. But not just that, how is it broken down into quarters, and how do we actually spend our money in transforming and revitalizing and all the kind of ideas that we've set out in terms of that bold sort of Joburg 2040 sort of activist agenda that was set out 13 or so years ago. So we're getting to a point where we have to move beyond the process of strategic planning and strategizing to real implementation. And that's the real challenge that we have to confront on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's where we need the support from the entities, from the boards to drive that implementation agenda. We can have as many strategies as we want, as many strategic frameworks and plans and documents, but up until we get to the point where we are implementing what we've said, what we've set out with the right budgets for the right purpose in the right area, then we know we are moving in the right direction. So hopefully, Program Director, as I conclude, this is a step in getting us there. It is a fairly dense but robust strategic planning process that we undertake in Johannesburg, but it is important to ensure that everybody contributes to it so that the outcomes are also there for everybody to benefit now and tomorrow. So I think that's really the kind of message we want to give from this. We hope that we do achieve what we set out in these plans, and we really count on everyone's support to really drive this agenda for all of us, because it's not really for us, it's for what was in that first slide. It's for the people who make Johannesburg everywhere in Johannesburg. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zaid. We now have a few minutes for discussion. If anyone has questions or thoughts on how to align the entity strategies with the city's priorities, please feel free to share with us. Any input, questions? I will start with you and I'll follow.
Good afternoon, Program Director. Thank you very much, Zaid. Brilliant presentation. I just have a question with regards to your slide on the roadmap. And I think that's a very, very critical slide because everything that you've mentioned hinges on the roadmap. Now, my question here is, how frequently have we reviewed the strategic plan? How old is this plan? How relevant is it in relation to international best practices? And is there any consanguinity in relation to elements of infrastructure development? Because I heard you spoke about the whole concept of a smart city. Because how much of that understanding have we explored from international best practices component? Because it can only be deemed as a thought or a nice to have in our discussions unless we have proper understanding of what a smart city really is and how long has this thought of a smart city now been within our plan that we haven't implemented as yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll take the second question or input and then allow Zaid to respond.
Good afternoon. Excuse me, mine is not necessarily a question related to this. I need to find out, will your presentation, particularly yours, Zaid, be available to us?
Thank you. Zaid, you can respond.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it will be. If I could answer on behalf of the program director, I think they will make it available, but I think we've got all these things. I mean, this is just a summary of a lot of other documents. I'm answering the second one first, if it's okay, but it should be available in that sense. Should I come and address?
You can come.
Yes, okay. I mean, the reason why is that I could talk for like an hour on that question on the roadmap, and I don't have an hour to talk on the roadmap. So, the roadmap is probably the most fascinating part of the long-term strategy because that actually tells us, when we're now looking back 15 years, what we did and didn't do and why we did and didn't do certain things. Now, the Joburg 2040 strategy, I mean, is probably the third or fourth one that came out in 2011. There was the initial Igoli plans that set out Johannesburg in terms of its structure and form and function in the sort of post-apartheid period. And what we then obviously had was the first long-term strategy, Joburg 2030. That actually was a very economic growth-focused strategy and said, well, if you want to develop Joburg into this world-class African city, because that's actually where the world-class story comes from, Igoli and 2030, this is what the factors of being world-class are. And then when we did that, we said, well, this is too economic. What about What about everybody else? What about the poor? What about human development? So then the human development strategy came out in 2004, and the first Joburg GDS came out in 2006. So the 2006 GDS, and I'm pretty certain Ruby Matang will remember this dates, probably because he was there at that time as well, was the first long-term strategy of any city in South Africa in the post-apartheid period, and set out exactly what the long-term strategic perspective needed to be. So we reviewed that strategy in 2010, and then we got up to 2011, the Joburg 2040 that we presented. We reviewed the 2011 strategy in 2016, but then there were changes politically at the time, and the Joburg 2040 strategy sort of went on ice, if I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't being implemented, you could say, in some ways between 2016 and 2019. It came back in 2019. We did review it in 2020. 2021, we've done another review. And then the elections came in 2021. It was also put on ice for a while. Now it's back on. We've reviewed it again. So we're continuously reviewing it with international best practice. We're looking at issues around smart cities and the kind of things that are there. Globally, you know, these strategies are being benchmarked by other cities around the world as well. And also issues around the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, all the kind of global agendas are fundamentally part of the long-term strategy. What needs to happen, though, is that we need to move beyond strategizing and processing strategy to processing implementation against the strategy. And when we look back, we did a 10-year review on issues around whether we've become smarter, whether we've become whatever it might be, positive or negative. I think the story is not that great. And that's why we have to move towards an implementation type of an agenda as well. I think the last point, obviously, that's crucial is that we have a very strong legacy of strategic planning in Johannesburg. That's over 20 odd years now. But whether that has transformed us into a particular city that we anticipated 20 years ago and what we're anticipating for the next 20 years is, I think, where the data tells us different things. And that's where the smart issues and the innovations and those things must be overlaid so that one day we can look back and say we did actually, you know, consolidate something. I hope that answers it. I've got to sum it up quickly. So, yeah.
Thank you, Zaid. Any other questions? We've got one. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's good to have the colleagues from JMPD. We normally meet under less desirable circumstances. Thank you, Program, and thank you very much for the presentation. I think my question is really around the involvement of the private sector, the PPP model, and how much of that is part of the strategy for the city so that we're able to diversify the pool of capital and the investment in some of the projects that the city is trying to accomplish, because I think that's really important. We're all confronting fiscal constraints, and how much of our models are speaking to attracting private capital. Are we meeting the threshold of bankability, fundability in our approach and strategy? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take the fourth question.
As one of the entities, our strategic approach to ensure that we fit in with the smart city is the development of the strategy of the smart market. The strategy has been developed, it's there, it's in implementation phase. And our biggest implementation hurdle is financing. Would you, as group governance, consider innovating your policies in order to give us room around financing to ensure the realization of the strategy of the smart market? The strategy has been there for quite some time, and if we don't implement it in time, it will stop being smart and be smart on paper and not in actual effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you. Zaid, can you take the third question?
Can I just go? Sorry, Vince Blenis again. Zaid, just on the side of, and I heard the smart city concept again, Moore's law tells us that technology advances every 2 years. Now, from a technological advancement perspective, how relevant is our current technologies as it relates to the development of technology as a whole, globally, from a smart city perspective? And I think that's important for us to understand. And then, because we are hearing the thoughts of innovation, do we have any plans to develop, just to dovetail on the previous question with regards to our relationship with the private sector? So what I'm asking you here is basically, do we have any plans to either develop an innovation hub where some of the help that is needed can be provided to the city from experts that's not just going to charge the city as a consultant or whatever the story may be? And I think that could be a specific area that I've observed in some of the presentations for the past month and a half already, that here's a need. There's no innovation hub where we can get all these experts to help rebuild plans and ideas and then get to the phase of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll respond to question number 4 and give Zaid to speak to 3 and 5. So in terms of the budget constraints that Joburg market is experiencing in terms of implementing the smart market initiative or strategy, for starters, I've got to concede that one of the contributors to the delayed implementation is indeed the issue of financial constraints. Now, I think we would appreciate the financial challenges that the city is experiencing and the reduced allocation in terms of our CAPEX or OPEX commitment. So what we are currently doing, what innovative ways that are in place, the National Treasury has intervened and is focusing on metropolitans across the country to say we must now conform to the trading reforms roadmaps, which seeks to say we need to run our businesses differently in a very innovative manner, such as to allow these entities to go out and be part of the triple Ps or to raise funds within the framework of the city. So that's a process. We have started with City Power, Water, and the next 3 entities is GRA, Pick It Up, and Market, by virtue of their business and how they contribute to the city and the economy. So that's currently underway, but it's quite structured, and the focus is on these 2 entities. And lastly, I want to say, look, that is a very difficult environment because the local government is heavily regulated. So what stops you from going out to the market and raise funds and enter into certain partnerships and all those things, it is because of the MFMA. And we engage Treasury to get some exemption in some provisions that will allow you to do what you're supposed to do. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll come back in on the issue of the private sector. How, if we've mobilized in that space, why have we not? In the first 5 years, there was a lot of initiative in terms of getting the private sector on board, in terms of actually saying, here's Joburg's strategy, let's buy in. It's also a very difficult thing, as the program director has indicated, that when you think about the regulations in local government and why and how to engage with the private sector, that's becoming a lot more tougher. So we haven't really gotten to a plan that says, okay, this is Joburg 2040, but this is what it means to the private sector, because I think we've seen it in the much more broader sense that everyone counts equally in the broad context of the city. But when we developed this strategy, we went through what is known as an outreach process for I think about 11 weeks, where there were specific engagements with the private sector. Now I'm talking about 2011. That actually said, what do you want as business? What do you want as capital? How do you want to see us as a city transform into a a city that you can also continue to thrive and do business in and attract that sort of investment. That was there. I think it feeds into the sort of underlying narrative of the strategy, but whether we've sold it enough as a city, I think, is the key challenge. And I don't think we have to that extent where, if you look at, for example, Copenhagen, or if you look at even global national strategies like what the Vision 2030 is of Saudi Arabia, every private sector company has to buy into that strategy. It's not the other way around. You know, as the country sets the strategy, and every single corporation has to buy into that, and you literally advertise the strategy for them through what they do and how they build themselves up. So I don't think have gotten to that point, because, you know, we have an NDP, we have probably had about 4 provincial strategies in this period, and then we've got the Joburg strategy that's there as well. But we haven't had a unified argument that says, this is Johannesburg for this reason, and we say, okay, we know why from a service delivery point of view, but that message to business, the private sector, to corporates, to the global companies, etc., needs to be clearer. I mean, you might say that is it even necessary? Because companies will invest where they want to, irrespective of whether you do what you do or not. So it is something we have to think about. And I know that in some of our engagements on the global side of it has actually taken us to a lot more of this kind of experience and exposure. So it is something that, you know, it's not just about the banks and the finances and the financial institutions that make Johannesburg. We've got to find a better narrative from a strategy point of view as well. So that covers, I think, the private sector question. I think the last one maybe I'll cover is on the smart city ideas. I don't think we've, I mean, similar to the sort of smart city and private sector story, I think they're very much correlated in that regard. We haven't opened ourselves up to be the sort of innovation center of South Africa. I mean, that's still largely moving towards Cape Town and Tshwane to a large extent, where places of innovation are not necessarily being driven through that. We do have a lot of smart city ideas and strategies and plans and thinking around what a kind of Johannesburg of the future looks like. But we're now in the future, so we need to find the right technology, the right kind of investment, the right type of platforms and systems to bring us into that space. And I don't think have gotten ourselves there. I don't think we've transformed fast enough in the smart city space. We have all the ideas, but we don't have the right type of systems, platforms, and innovations that have actually said, do it anyway. What will end up happening is exactly the private sector conversation. They'll do it anyway. They will come up, they will invent, they will invest, they will formulate, and then they will drive and deliver, and we'll end up watching the entire thing happening. So that 2-year cycle that you talk about, we'll miss it, because the last 2 years we haven't even caught up from the previous 2 years, you know. So it's that kind of a challenge, and it's one of the priorities of the organization at the moment is smart cities. So we should hopefully try to do a lot better in that regard. So yeah, thanks. Okay, you can call me.
Thank you very much, Zaid. I think you have seen that our chief strategist has spoken. Thank you once again, Zaid. Can we please give him a round of applause? Thank you. It is a privilege to introduce Sipho Mhlambi, who is the head of governance and reporting within Group Governance Department, which I lead. A very intelligent young man, brave and a dynamic person, and I consider him to be the future of governance. On a lighter note, this is a man that shocked the COJ system last week when he issued a communique that his boss was on leave and he will be acting until further notice. And that had so many connotations, and I received a number of calls from the city to say what is happening. So then I contacted him, and I was on leave, and I said to Mhlambi, please go and change that communique. It has shocked the system. And then his response calmly, so he said, no, Zizi, let's give them an hour or so. This is an opportunity to test the system whether it appreciates you or not. Well, you did it, Mhlambi. Mhlambi is the man, the gentleman that sits in all 13 boards and board committees as a shareholder rep. He sits on my behalf, on the behalf of the CM, the MMCs, and the executive mayor. He sits in these boards to protect the shareholder interests and shareholder values as required for in the Systems Act, the shareholder policy, and the city's delegation of authority. Together with his team, Hlambi is responsible for driving the city's reporting protocols and performance assessments of the entities and that of the boards. His presentation will focus on the city's group governance framework, which depicts the organizational governance infrastructure. This framework is currently under review, and it is important for maintaining transparency and accountability across all levels of municipal governance. Please welcome Adem Hlambi to the podium.
Thank you, Program Director, for the reminder of the 15 minutes, but given the fact that we are at the theater, I will apply some artistic freedom to that 15 minutes. Good afternoon. In absentia, the Acting Executive Mayor, members of the Mayoral Committee, City Manager, Group Head, chairpersons of boards of directors, chairpersons of the group advisory committees, members of both group advisory committees and the board of directors, executive managers from entities, particular focus with the accounting officers, fellow COJ officials, the media, our residents online, esteemed guests, good afternoon. It is my distinct pleasure to not only shock the system, but also assist it recover. If you ever wanted to find out group head and program director, who your friends and enemies were, just check your call log from the day until further notice. Mine is simple, members of the board and group advisory committees. My presentation today is meant to assist you understand the architecture of the city, its governance makeup, and how the work that you do underpins the expectations of the residents as articulated by Zaid through our strategic planning documents and the frameworks articulated by not only the executive mayor, acting executive mayor, but also the MMC of finance, and lastly, the city manager. There we go. I'll start by the core mandate of the municipality, and I think it's a critical starting point. Zaid presented, or at least Mr. Ibrahim, my colleague, presented the statistical overview with regards to some of these critical measures of which municipalities or other instruments of governments are measured against. He articulated the statistics on the national GDP, the growth rates, unemployment and poverty, and gave you an overview or the situational context where we are. Now, from a governance perspective, and the work that the group advisory committees and the boards of directors do, this is also a critical consideration, but with a different view. Our mandate is to deliver basic services, and the measure of those is a result of these economic outputs that Zaid articulated. The on-the-ground feeling or the lived customer experience is a direct testament of the work that you must do within your boards and the advisory committees, where we must change the lived experience of residents, giving them a better quality of life. As much as we are happy as a city, at least currently, that we are sitting well above the 60% threshold, particularly for customer satisfaction and the quality of life, it can't be that we are satisfied with those levels of performance. The residents expect better from us, and it's our duty to deliver. We operate in a highly regulated environment. The city manager articulated with a particular focus on consequence management, that as you act within the law. This is no different for many other areas of the business of the city of Johannesburg and the entities that you are tasked to oversee. This picture here shows the various legislative provisions that you need to focus on. Chief amongst those is the Constitution, which speaks to the previous slide on the provision of access to basic services. We've got the Structures Act, the Systems Act, the MFMA from a financial perspective. Particular focus for the entities is the Companies Act, which articulates the manner in which a company, at least in the form of an entity, is meant to conduct itself. But there are various other instruments that are available to the entities that they must follow and fall within. Part of them we'll speak to with regards to the MOI, the SDA, which the group had initially touched on, and the Shareholder Compact. This is now the governance framework that tries to bring all of those legislative instruments together into a basket so that it assists you as board members and group advisory committees execute your fiduciary responsibility, but I'll touch on that as we go. The city has adopted a very well-established separation of powers principle, where it articulates that there should be checks and balances in place to ensure that the various structures of governance within the city are able to function optimally. You've got the legislature that resides, it's the council of the municipality, led by the speaker, which focuses on the most strategic and policy decisions on behalf of the residents of the city of Johannesburg. You've got the executive arm of council, which is led by the executive mayor, assisted by the leader of the executive business, who plays a critical conduit between the executive and the legislative arms of council. Where we operate as city officials is the administration, led by our accounting officer or city manager, as we colloquially call him, Mr. Floyd Brink here. He's assisted by various Section 57 employees from the department, but also by the accounting officers of the municipal entities that you're entrusted to oversee. They play a critical role in assisting the administration achieve its strategic objectives as set out by council. To truly appreciate the length and breadth of your responsibilities, I think you have to then have a view of what the governance framework or the governance arrangements from a structural perspective of the cities are. The city adopted a cluster-based approach for service delivery and governance, and that's used as under a group context where you've got subsidiaries or entities and departments that form part of the group. The cluster system becomes a topical issue, and I'll expand on it on my next slide, but it's literally driven from a technical and a political side. On the technical side, it's driven by the administration, led by the city manager, and then on the political side, by the executive mayor, also reporting to the legislature as part of the strategic decision-making machinery of the city. To have a firm appreciation of where we come from, and I think Zay, to a smaller degree, touched on it, you have to appreciate the historic context of how the city is made up. In the early 2000s, the forefathers, as I like to call them, of the city, incorporated a mechanism to try and establish how the city ought to run. The Egoli model around 2001, 2002 was started. This was even before the advent of the MFMA, that tried to corporatize the delivery of services on behalf of a municipality, which obviously then led to the incorporation and departments, the incorporation of entities, and the formation and alignment of departments within the city. In 2011, and I think Zay touched on it, the institutional review process was undertaken, and it resulted in what we now have a cluster approach for the city, which is currently the model that the city follows. This model was then adopted by council and implemented as what we now know it as the governance framework of the city of Johannesburg, that speaks to various clusters within the city. Now, what the clusters are a segmentation of entities and departments based on the type of services and functions that they deliver. The most obvious one, maybe to start with, is then the Sustainable Services Cluster, led by the now acting Executive Mayor, Councillor Jack Squaila. This cluster has all the entities that deliver basic services, so City Power, Joburg Water, Pick It Up, but also includes the Johannesburg Social Housing Company. If you remember the slide that myself and Zay showed, access to basic services forms broadly into those basic services of human settlements, water, provision of sanitation, and the likes. You've got a support department which assists with a policy perspective, there being the EISD, or Environmental and Impact EISD department. Those abbreviations, they can be tongue twisters at times. Within that cluster is where service delivery, at least from a bulk services provision, is managed. You will see yourselves in these clusters as you provide oversight within the different entities that you head. You've got the economic growth cluster, which is responsible for economic development in the city. The department is in there. You've got the transport and planning portfolios in there, which includes, obviously, the JDA, Metrobus, GRA, MTC, and the Department of Transport there to provide strategic oversight to the transport portfolio. You've got the Human and Social Development Cluster, which has the Health Department, has the Johannesburg City Theatre, thank you for the venue that we are currently in, but also includes the city parks and zoos, of which the acting EM spoke about, letting us get into the zoos to try and understand at least some of the animal assets that the city holds. You've got a community development and social development there as part of the departments that are responsible for providing these critical support services to the most needy of our residents within the city of Joburg. Lastly, you've got the good governance cluster. This is largely driven by core departments within the city of Johannesburg. Group governance, the department that we are coming from, is part of this cluster. It includes group corporate and shared services, group finance, group ICT, group communications, and other group functions that assist the city from a shared services perspective, drive the model of the cluster system within the city. Departments support each other and the entities to try and, in a collaborative and integrated fashion, deliver services on behalf of the city. This largely speaks to what we call the city's governance model. It's driven by the city manager, supported by his executives and group heads and the accounting officers of entities in delivering the services. We've got structures and systems and policies in place that assist us as the implementers of these strategies provide these services. We rely on yourselves as board members and group advisory committees to provide the oversight and performance management mechanisms that help the city move its service provision forward. The cluster system is there and is established. It helps us orientate ourselves within the city, and the departments and entities are monitored and measured on a quarterly basis to ensure that we are moving in the right direction when it comes to service delivery, but we are also being held accountable as administrators for delivering the functions that we're enumerated to perform. You've got the MMCs and the mayoral committee playing a critical political oversight, but also giving executive support to the administration on what the residents of Johannesburg expect through the mandates given them through council. All of this is amalgamated through the reporting. I've touched on how we are a heavily regulated environment, and this is driven by what we have to deliver to council as far as giving our residents feedback on the mechanisms and the resources that they've entrusted us to deliver. This is the flow of reporting is what will guide you as a board on the work that you must do, and the group advisory committee similarly so. It starts at a technical level at the bottom of the slide where you're seeing the EMT, which is the executive management team, driven by the city manager. It's fed by a technical cluster system from the different clusters where we provide technical input as ourselves amongst peers in the administration, and then we feed that information to the accounting officer of the municipality, who then has to then take the reporting to the upper and subsequent structures. There's a political oversight structure there called the Chairperson's Quarterly Meeting, where the portfolio MMC is responsible for the various portfolios within the cluster, will hold yourselves as board members, particularly through your chair and your executive, accountable on the delivery against what Zaid has articulated for a city perspective as the SDBIP, but in particular focus for municipal entities, it will be the business plan. So this is a platform where you, as the board through your chair, will have to account not only to the city through group governance, but to the political oversight structure of the MMC and the portfolio MMC responsible for there. It is at this juncture that as you've concluded your performance management, the city must consider your performance as well. And I'll touch on that later. And I think it's some of the work that my colleague, Ms. Partha, does through the Shareholder Services Unit. You have the mayoral subcommittee, which is a political structure where the amalgamation of reports are now being taken by the portfolio MMCs, signed off for submission to the mayoral committee. The mayor has appointed MMCs to assist him execute his executive function, and they must then take reports from their respective entities and departments and deliver that feedback to him. From the mayoral committee, we've got chairpersons here of the group advisory committees and the members. This is where you come in as well. You are hired as captains of industry to provide strategic oversight and experience with an external overview to the municipality. This is where you are meant to assist the city, as a city manager and the acting EM said. Assist the city through your experience, through your networks, and all the lived experiences that you would have at least brought to the city in your appointments. There are political oversight structures in place. Chief amongst them is council, but before the reports reach council, they go to what's called Section 79 oversight committees. This just demonstrates to you how complex and how thorough the city's oversight mechanisms are. You've got the group advisory committees, like I've touched on. You've got the entities oversight, which you play a particular role in, but there's also the political side through the Municipal Performance Accounts Committee, the Section 79, and most importantly, Council as the ultimate accounting authority when it comes to your municipality. We must not shy away of how the entities are formed and what purpose they serve. The entities were formed on behalf of the city. The founding documents for these entities are in terms of Section 15 of the Companies Act, where we have the Memorandum of Incorporation that were articulated in the early stages of incorporations of the city. These documents serve as a starting point of what the functions of the municipal entities are. You've got the service delivery agreements, which is a commitment from the entity side on what services they are going to deliver, at what quantity, in what quality, on behalf of the municipality. These are ordinarily signed every 5 years, and these are an ongoing revision and commitment from the municipal entities to make sure that they are staying in line with what is expected of them as per their Memorandum of Incorporation. I must not be shy in mentioning that these municipal entities, as much as they are standalone businesses, they are wholly owned by the city of Johannesburg. What this means is that the city is the sole shareholder. The strategic direction that you must implement is on behalf of the city of Johannesburg. And as representative of the shareholder within your boards, it is our mandate and duty to remind you of this mandate, but also assist you to ensure that you stay in line with what the city is expecting on your side. The Municipal Structures Act, under Section 86, and to a lesser extent, Section 93, indicates that the municipality must develop mechanisms to ensure and mechanisms to assist it maintain control over its entities. Part of this, the responsibility then has led to the formation of some of the documents of which the group head has already touched on. Part and important, and the most important, I think, from where you are as group advisory committee members and board members, is the shareholder policy as an instrument of control. This policy is your Bible. It guides you, understand what is expected from you. It regulates the establishment and the management of the governance protocols within the city and the entities. It assists you understand how you are appointed, the compositions of your committees, whether it's executive directors, non-executive directors, independent audit committee members, and the group advisory committee members. It helps you understand how your meetings ought to be managed, and this will be further augmented in your specific entity through terms of reference of which the company secretaries will share with you so you understand. Your roles and responsibilities as members of the board and group advisory committees are codified within the shareholder policy. Your term of office is clear, and the remuneration there, albeit you may not be happy or happy with it depending of your experience, is codified in that policy. The policy is something that is currently under review as part of some of the review mechanisms that both Zaid and the group head has touched on, and we are constantly looking at areas where we can improve. We've got a governance framework where all your company secretaries all congregate, and then we try and then find areas of commonality and what we can look to improve on the policy. So it's something that is an ongoing body of work, and we're looking forward for the next version of the policy to assist you understand your roles and responsibility, but also the expectations of the shareholder. We've got the shareholder compact. I think Group Head, you spoke at length on what this document is. Briefly, it's a commitment between the board chair and the executive mayor on what the entity will deliver. I think the group has spoken at length on it, so I won't spend time on it. What is expected of you as board of directors is clear. You are meant to provide the accounting officer and the executive management team with clear direction, leadership, and guidance. Your independence and objectivity is why you are here. You are meant to bring your external experiences and your perspective in helping us change, drive, and implement policies and strategies as directed by the shareholder through its strategic priorities as articulated in the IDP, but also in the mayoral priorities that the EM spoke to. You are there to drive the strategic direction, and I'm glad the executive mayor spoke about it. I think that also the MMC of Finance to say that the strategic direction that you bring through the entities cannot be divergent to what that is driven by the city, and it's your responsibility to ensure that there's alignment in that regard. You are also the custodian of governance, and I'll speak to this briefly in the next slide. What I've presented to you as board members may sound daunting, especially when you consider the fiduciary responsibility that you hold, but rest assured, group governance as a department is there to support you and assist you in executing your fiduciary responsibilities. We are the extension of the shareholder, the representative of the city manager, executive mayor, and council in your board meetings, and we are there to ensure that your functions are always performed within the regulatory framework, but also within the strategic direction of the city. Ours is to advise, and hopefully the advice that we provide you assists you execute your duties within the regulatory framework. Some key considerations that you also must make in your board meetings as well will be the company secretary. The company secretary is a critical and vital part of the board meetings. The company secretary's role is not to just take minutes, compile matters arising and the likes, and coordinate the meetings. The company secretary is responsible for guiding you and ensuring that you are operating within the compliance framework of the city, of the regulatory framework outside the city, and whatever guiding documents that may be applicable. They are there to support you in the board, obviously the preparation for the board meetings, the packs, the minutes, and the likes, but also they play as a critical liaison between yourself and the shareholder. When you want to communicate with the city, you will do it through your company secretary. We are there to obviously advise and engage, but your point of contact is the company secretary. The role of the company secretary, particularly where there are no legal or standalone legal functions within the entity, is critical. The company secretaries are responsible. It's also a responsibility that they must adopt, that they must be in a position and suitably skilled to provide you with the requisite advice so that you take the correct decision as you execute your fiduciary responsibilities. The company secretary is an advisor. It's meant to play a pivotal role in driving ethical conduct and engagements within the board, but also assist you as chairperson and board members engage appropriately and also in the best interest of the company, bringing obviously the historic context and business knowledge that they will be holding on the account that they are the ones responsible for the company information within the entities. A critical consideration that you must also be mindful of is that the separation of powers model also applies to you as you execute your duties there. Within your entities and the functions that as you oversee, there are executive functions and there are non-executive functions. Executive functions involve the day-to-day operations within the entity. Management of the entity, implementation of policies, budgets, expenditure patterns, and the likes. Overseeing service delivery is a sole responsibility of the executives. The primary decision-making on operational matters is a function of the executive management team. Now, you play a critical role in this executive functions from an oversight perspective. From a non-executive function perspective, you do not participate in the day-to-day operations of the entities. This is critical because the separation of these functions means that you must be able to hold these executives accountable. Now, you can't hold executive management accountable if you are loitering in the corridors of an entity or constantly in the WhatsApp or the emails of the executive management directing or how functions to go. Try your best to separate the work that you want to, or at least the change you want to see, and limit it to the context of the board meetings, because then you come in as an independent party who gives advice that must assist the executive management team. That being said, to my fellow executive, this is not a carte blanche or a blank check for you to operate in impunity. Executive directors are expected to be accountable to the non-executive directors and the oversight bodies. They are there to hold us accountable. So let us respect the respective functions that we are meant to execute independently from an executive and non-executive side, but find the harmony that is required to take the businesses forward. The separation of powers helps us have these checks and balances, and then obviously assist you as executive directors, but also you as board members and group advisory committee understand what it is you can and cannot do. It's critical to understand this function. Often when we raise this as a governance matter, a discussion becomes topical to say that what is oversight versus what maybe from an administrative side will be considered overreach. It's clear. Oversight is that you are monitoring the performance and service delivery functions of the entity. You are ensuring that the policies in place are adhered to, and you are holding executive management accountable for implementation of strategies that you've set through the direction of the municipality. What would be considered overreach, whether in perception or in reality, would be you getting involved in the day-to-day operations of an entity. We must respect the respective roles of the executive and non-executive, but I must reiterate, it is your role as non-executive directors, independent audit committee members, and group advisory committee to hold executive management accountable. The city manager stressed this in his opening address as well, to say, please do implement consequence management where appropriate, but not only from a punitive side, but from a development side, and always act within the best interest of the entity. Where there is unclarity, we've got best practices and the King Code, the principles there, to try and assist us understand what it is that we can and can't do in our respective roles. Yours is to understand the regulatory framework that you operate under. The best practices are there to guide, and the impacts that you are meant to realize from your appreciation of the regulatory framework, implementation of best practices, it means that the decision-making within your structures and the entity will be largely improved. We will build the confidence of stakeholders and the trust, and we'll enhance the long-term sustainability within the municipal entities. Your effectiveness as a board is dependent on your competence, your independence, and your strategic oversight. Ms. Partha, this is a contemptuous point, but if we are going to be a truly accountable city, even the evaluations of the group advisory committee, the board of directors, must be a regular part of our governance machinery. We must monitor all our performance to ensure that we are all performing the roles that we are expected to do to deliver services in the most efficient and effective manner. The city manager articulated and stressed the issues around our changed focus around ESG or sustainability. We must focus on our environmental, social, and governance aspect as part of our reporting in particular. We are in the process of reviewing our at least integrated reporting methodology, but part of the revisions that we must consider as a city is that what is it that we are doing from an ESG and sustainability perspective. We've got the former chair of the group audit committee coming to speak to us around digital security, and I think that's an appropriate presentation to follow this one, because as we look at digital transformation as a city, in line with the smart city discussions that the members had raised before that, we must augment our governance of technology and data, which means obviously cybersecurity becomes a topical issue, but we must also safeguard the city that it's digitally resilient and that innovation assists us in minimizing the cost of delivering services and ensuring that we do it in the most effective way forward. You must create a future-fit governance framework within your respective entities. You must be cognizant of emerging trends within the space, whether it's climate, digital disruptions, shifting demographics, but you must also prepare through your oversight and strategic direction and cushion the entity against the impacts of future challenges against service delivery and the competitiveness of delivering services. You must anticipate future conditions. Scenario planning is a critical area that boards must focus on, and then try and anticipate what economic, social, and governance conditions will perpetuate in future, and then try and cushion the entity against whatever disruption that may come in that regard. Innovation and adaptability become part and parcel of what we must do. We must foster a culture of innovation within the entities to address the complexity of our problems and also decrease the burden financially on delivering services. If I'm to leave you with last few words from a governance and reporting perspective, and maybe on behalf of the group head, is that you must lead with integrity. You must act with wisdom and work together in the pursuit of a Johannesburg that stands tall, prosperous, just, and enduring. In your hands lies the destiny of the city. Let us carry it forward with honor, integrity, conviction, and a commitment to excellence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mhlambi. We really appreciate, I think you'll agree with me that the presentation was quite comprehensive and very clear. And I've learned a few things from this presentation. The first one is that as board members, stay in your lane. Yeah, stay in your lane. This business of a concerning level of interference must come to an end. Or else you become employees of the city once, then that will be okay. And I do want to put it on record as well in front of the MMC for Finance that is responsible for this function, that in the event you are found in a wrong lane, we're going to remove you. And we've got a very tight policy that seeks to say we can retire you at any given time, because we cannot afford to have people that are in the business of collapsing this public institution These entities are ours, and these entities, they belong to the state. And we've got to ask ourselves, what are we going to bequeath to the next generation? That is important. And what legacy are you going to leave behind with all the challenges that we have, water scarcity, the energy challenges, dilapidated road network, and the waste management challenges? What are you doing to address those challenges? I think Joburg will be facing a serious water scarcity. Is it in 2040 or 2030 or so? But what are you doing to address those things? I think City Power was one of the entities that was providing a revenue to the city to fund other entities and programs. And that's no longer the case with independent power producers in place and the acts that are in place to open up that space and open up the competition. So how do we diversify that to ensure that we maintain these entities to remain going concern, sustainable in the future? And lastly, I want to say before I invite for any questions that just to reiterate what Mhlambi said, we have got at minimum 3 responsibilities as the board. One, it is to provide the strategic direction of the entity. That's your responsibility. And management is here, they must understand it, they must allow you the space to provide and pronounce on the strategic direction as contained in the social compact that you will sign with the executive mayor, the shareholder compact. The second thing is, we have a responsibility to lead the formulation of the policies that are applicable and relevant to the entity that you are leading. That's critical. As we have indicated, this space is highly regulated. And for us to keep these entities intact, we've got to comply. And the last thing is that you have to provide governance oversight. And people think that governance is about the appointment of the boards. That's not it. And I think the CM spoke about it. It cuts across. It speaks about the stability and the sustainability of our finances. It talks about the provision of the quality service delivery as provided for in the Constitution and cascaded down in other acts of Parliament. On that note, I would like to invite questions and you can engage. Thank you. There's one. Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, members, colleagues, and a group head. My intention is to ask a difficult question. Group head, my question is on the performance of the board. What happens if we, or the board, let me not say we, because it would look like I'm referring to the entity I'm appointed to. Let me generalize by saying, what happens if yesterday we receive a communication that comes from the shareholder that says we must implement by tomorrow an increment of the employees? When you then assess the performance of the board, where would that performance linked to in terms of negativity or positivity? Because if you assess, the board would get 100%, not 99.1 because of that communique that arrived late. Thank you very much. That's the difficult question I was asking. Thanks.
Very difficult indeed. Do we have another question? Yes. I'll start there.
Thank you so much, my learned friends, Mr. Mhlambi. On a lighter note, can we not start on a clean sheet with this budget cuts? Let's wipe off all the debt and start from zero.
Maybe we can respond to the 2 questions. Mhlambi is from my team, so I want to give you the opportunity. I'm going to allow you to respond to these questions. And if there's a need for me to come in, I will do so. I've recognized you, say. Thanks. Mshambi, just come. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Program Director. You are here in your capacity as bus driver, not as group head. I'm in charge, until further notice at least. No, thank you very much to the members for the questions. If that is a difficult question, then my job is suddenly easy. Yeah, no, member, that question is not difficult, it's clear. You spoke about increments. Those are regulated in terms of collective bargaining within the city of Johannesburg, so they are not related to performance. So if there is a directive, it's ordinarily on the cost of living adjustment based on the collective bargaining agreement with organized labor. That directive is usually retrospective in its nature, to say effective on a specific date. That's when it must be implemented, and it does not tie necessarily to the decision-making, at least considerations for the board of directors. It's a citywide consideration, and when that directive comes, yours is to implement. That decision is made, unfortunately, outside of the board, and it comes to the board because we understand the complexity and the codependencies of the city and the board of directors. So we ordinarily share it with boards of directors for implementation to ensure that at least you are appraised of that decision, but also then you can cushion the entity from a financial perspective on the implications thereof. It's not meant for you to be held accountable if you don't. I think what's critical is that to anticipate when that decision is coming. It comes same time every year around the same time. It's usually for non-executive staff, or at least non-executive directors or executive directors from a senior managers on the implementation of their increase, but at least on the lower levels of staff, there's a collective outcome that comes out, and yours is just to implement. So it's not necessarily linked to the performance of the board. I think what's critical from the performance of the board is not to seek to look at it as a measure that you need to be concerned about. It's a challenge to the board to say that if you are going to hold executive managers accountable, you need to also introspect on what it is that you are doing and the effectiveness that you have on their performance. A failure of the entity is not only on the CEO, it's a reflection of the board, and that's where the spirit, I think, of that discussion on at least the management and at least performance evaluations, not management of the board, is taken from. The second question, member, I'll pretend like I can't see which entity you are coming from, but I suspect it has an eye on a public transportation system. The question, the answer is we always start on a clean slate. It's the unfortunate history of the company that you inherit that puts you in a different position. The city has, over the past 2 or 3 years, MMC Finance, been in rigorous discussions about the implications of writing off some of this debt. There are tax implications that unfortunately kick in if we were to do a wholesale blanket sweeping. So that's the first consideration. But the most important consideration that we always ask from a governance perspective is that if I took all your debt away today, would you not incur fresh debt as early as tomorrow? Now, if you can answer that question as a board, is it what strategies you've put in place onto ensuring that the historic challenges that have led entities to be in the overdraft positions are now being dealt with. The trading reforms discussion the group had touched on there specifically deals with some of these issues to say that we need to create sustainable and financially independent entities that deliver services. We can't do that by just writing off all debt. We must be able to demonstrate that if we wipe the slate clean today, tomorrow you'll show a net positive inflow of cash instead of being dependent on the city. So the city is not against looking at those as provisions, but we need to balance the inflows and outflows to ensure that the financial sustainability of the city becomes a discussion going forward. I think I've covered there. There was a question.
Yes. I think there's another member that should be given an opportunity to ask a question.
No, thank you, Program Director. I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, but I think you will assist in terms of clapping this to a specific category. But I'm just concerned and worried about the delays when we're receiving PACs. You have said the mouthful in terms of doing justice. But if we're going to receive PACs or the documents in 3 days to read all of them, which means in that board meeting, we're not going to discuss anything. You'll just be there, just warm up those chairs, and then we agree with whatever that is being discussed. And on its own, it's problematic because we need to engage those documents. And when you are there, you need to be critical so that if there are some issues that need to be zoomed in, and then we can be able to do that. So it's a plea that can you please receive the documents on time? And it's stipulated there, if I'm not mistaken. It says you need to receive the documents within 7 days. Even 7 days, I don't think it's still enough. Let's get more days to engage those documents so that we'll be able to diagnose whatever that needs to be diagnosed in those documents that are forwarded to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Going to take the fourth question. Sir?
Thank you very much, Program Director. I have a question. From a governance perspective, I think my question is based on lack of knowledge, and I'd like to seek clarity on that. There is the concept of the sweeping account. Now, we are holding the executive to account. If these individuals are not paying service providers within 30 days, now somehow there is a disconnect if it comes to that. Because we are asking of the executive to execute a mandate, but yet these individuals or the entities are not permitted to function 100% within the ambit of what has been given to them financially. So whatever comes in gets swept out, and then they have to apply for that money. As an outsider coming into seeing all of this, and I have to mention this, as a professional, something is off. Can somebody please clarify that point? Because how do I hold a CEO accountable, and it becomes an audit finding, by the way. So within 30 days, we did not comply with A, B, C, and D. It's an audit finding. So the AG comes annually, as you rightfully mentioned, that they will come. Now, how are we going to deal with this? And I'm speaking on behalf of all the CEOs out there and all the FDs or CFOs and MDs, because I think this is something that, well, it needs to be addressed in some way or another. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mhlambi, the podium is still yours. If I feel that we have not adequately responded to these questions, I'll chip in. For now.
Thank you, Program Director, and I welcome the questions. I think I'll start with the easier of the two questions. The management of PACs, their delivery, submission of agendas, is a sole responsibility of the company secretary. And that's why I highlighted it there as a critical pivot point for the board. What's maybe you ought to also appreciate, that slide I demonstrated with the flow of reporting is an advent, or at least the outcome, of the city's extremely regulated reporting requirements in terms of the legislation. So sometimes there are just practical difficulties in delivering these PACs to you on time. I know the group advisory committees will share a similar experience, so will the board of directors, so that you have just a contextual appreciation on how the city's reporting works. At the end of a quarter, after the 3 months, we are meant to provide the first draft of reports. Now, those reports are ordinarily due within 5 days of the conclusion of the quarter. So if the quarter ends in July, or at the 30th of June, on the 5th of July, the first drafts are expected from the city. Now, the executives, it means that they need to close their books from a financial perspective before then. So we ordinarily advise of a soft close on the 25th so that you are able to accrue and then build the reporting, which then obviously must go to various structures of the cities on its way to board. So it's some of those technical difficulties that make it difficult for company secretaries to deliver these packs to you on time. But I do agree with you. And it's part of one of the way forwards that I've submitted, that we must leverage technological advancement and changes within that environment to try and unlock some of these operational bottlenecks. It should not be that it takes 7 days for a board member to consider a board report. Remember, reporting is a living process. The sooner boards move to digital board packs, and I know there is resistance in some spaces to that, the better. It means that we are able to upload documents as and when they become ready, instead of waiting for the pack to be completed together and then set as a whole. It is something that from a city perspective, and I think MMC Arnold articulated the importance of MTC being an enabler for at least technological assistance and tools to try and assist the city take its processes forward, and we're looking forward, at least prospectively, that some of those challenges will become a thing of the past. But I do agree with you. It is critical that documents are sent to board members and group advisory committee in time. It is our responsibility as our executive managers, as an administration, to take that responsibility and ensure that we do not put you in a difficult corner where you receive a pack the day before the meeting and expect you to execute your fiduciary responsibility. So we have responsibilities both sides of the table, and I think it's something that we'll continuously work towards and improve. With regards to the 30-day payments, I think the city manager was quite articulate in some of the challenges that we have as a city. Some of them are historic, some of them are contextual and current. As much as we'd want to, at least I've had the experience of being on the executive side as well. We must pay our service providers within 30 days. It's what the law says. But the practicality of that is very difficult given the financial difficulties that the city finds itself in. It's easy to be on the outside and say something is off by not paying. But when you are on the inside, you will also appreciate some of the entities that you will oversee that are making these emboldened pleas to you as board members on behalf of those entities, is that they're not receiving the allocations on time. They are the cause of the city's financial issues. You can't have accumulated a deficit of R1 billion and then be the same entity that complains that you can't pay your service providers in time. The sweeping arrangements of the city are meant to assist the city manage finances across the board. There are cash-generating entities, there are non-cash generating entities. There are lucrative services, there are social services that the city must deliver. The reason why the city adopts a collective sweeping arrangement is to try and offset the social services, especially from the human and social development cluster, your community development, social development, the provision of indigent support to entities. Those are all the responsibilities that the municipality has. So when you are sitting in an entity, I understand the frustration of not getting these allocations, but look at those limitations in the context of the city to say that at some point we can't switch off water to people because they are not paying. So that comes at a cost and it runs a deficit for the entity. It's then difficult to then fund other areas of the city if we are not collecting on those. Issues around technical losses, particularly in the service delivery entities, Joburg Water, City Power. It is those shortfalls in those spaces that created difficult financial situations within the city to then pay service providers on time. We can't pay entities and service providers with money we don't have. And it's why the city manager, and I think the MMC of Finance was particularly strong to say that assist as board members and group advisory committee the entities to achieve, in particular, their collection targets. When we all collect and when we all spend within the budget framework that we are given, but we also then realize savings through efficiencies, whether it's technological or operational efficiencies, then we'll hopefully see a change in that picture. So it is a plea, I think, from a governance perspective on our side to say, help the city, help you as well. Let us be operationally efficient. Let's not overspend. Let us deal with issues of fruitless and wasteful expenditure, because it's those small expenditures that you may write off as a board because you want the books to look good that have a long or downstream effect on the financial situation of the city. So I think from a management perspective at a city level, we'll just implore the entities to not only be patient with the city in trying to balance their competing priorities, but also be responsible in ensuring that the entities that you oversee deliver on their financial targets so that we see a more sustainable outlook for the city of Johannesburg. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hlambi. I'm sure you agree with me that in the city we have got skin. And that's what we're striving to do, to develop young talents that are gonna lead this city. It is important to have seen from Zaid, and I told you that he's a chief strategist, and we are seeing the future as well in the governance space. These are good things that we must highlight and elevate MMC, and we develop these young people, and we keep them within the institution. Thank you very much, Hlambi. You may join others. We are now moving to the next presentation, and our next speaker is Ms. Zodwa Manasseh, who is the former GAC chairperson, a seasoned corporate leader, and board member in many organs of state and private sector. Zodwa is one of the first black females to attain the status of the CA South Africa, a business leader of note, a mentor, and rightfully so, a mother to many young professionals in the country. And I'm also her product. As we embrace, Ms. Manasseh will present on cyber risk mitigation strategies and cybersecurity governance. As we embrace more digital tools, it is crucial that we protect our infrastructure from cyber threats. This presentation will provide valuable insights on how we can better safeguard the city's systems. Please welcome Mama Manasseh. Thank you.
My apologies, I'm using both manual and technical. Program Director, the Honorable Acting Executive Mayor, the Mayoral Committee, MMCs, I see the MMC for Finance who spoke this earlier today, the City Manager, I can't see him, the executive leadership of the city, the chairs of boards, the board members, and the executive of these entities. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I know I'm standing between you, just between you and lunch. Please, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I'm sure a lot of you are asking what is close to retired, no, just 5 to retired, old CA, chartered accountant. Oh, okay. Standing in front of you talking about cybersecurity. I think the main reason, the first and most important reason is that I love my city. And I think that deserves a loud applause. Thank you. But the other thing, as Landry is saying, I was the chair of the Group Audit Committee here a few years ago. And then a few years ago, people were talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution, and I kept asking myself, what is this 4th Industrial Revolution? And then it took me to the journey of digital transformation. And at my age, I started to look at where I can empower myself about this digital transformation, because there's a saying that if you are not in the disruption, you are being disrupted. So we all want to be in the lane of disruption. And I was happy to hear everyone talking about the smart city, and this is where we should be. So I decided I don't want to be a retired, obsolete chartered accountant. So I started the journey of looking at where I can get this information, which I will encourage all the board members and the leadership to try and empower yourselves. It cost me a lot of money, but today you can do it for free. It's all online. Went and studied with the University of Oxford, Harvard University, and MIT. I won't tell you all the courses, but including artificial intelligence, fintech, and last year, this is why I'm here. I studied cybersecurity. That course scared me so much. I started to prepare the gospel of cybersecurity. And I'm going to all the people I like Mlandu and the city, and telling them about this important aspect, because I have been sitting in boards for more than 25 years. I've chaired very important audit committees, but not once, and I don't know, I need to look at the other members. Not once have I approved a policy of cybersecurity. Not once. And the work that needs to be done in terms of cybersecurity is not just to tick the policy areas, is to protect the assets of the organizations that you are leading. There are 13 organizations here. So my presentation is going to be very high level because each entity needs to look at its own challenges in terms of cybersecurity. Now, I was told I need to press something. Somebody needs to help me because I'm told I couldn't bring, please, just one moment. Where do I press? You can continue. Oh, you, okay. All right, first slide. No, go back. The question about why cybersecurity, everything is online. The money you pay, everything, I mean, all the courses I did were online. My certificates first came online. You talk about meetings, 90% of the meetings that I have in my boards now are online. And, you know, I travel, I go everywhere. My phone is telling me where I'm going. You know, every transactions, my health, everything is online. My fingerprints, my eyes, my face, what else, my signatures, all of that is online. That is why we're talking about cybersecurity, because now it is so easy for cyber criminals to access that information. It is very, very lucrative because data, any data is sold in the dark web and is quite important. And the other reason that I felt so guilty and felt that I need to come and talk to everyone is that we always look at the physical assets and make sure that we physically verify. And there is that line in the financial statements that says intangible asset. But had anyone looked at, have we protected our data? And what have we done? What are the policies? What are the procedures that we've taken to protect those assets? All right, we can move to the next slide. Now, looking at the risks, we all know that when we are attacked, when there's a criminal, cyber criminal coming to your entity to steal information and to disrupt you, you know, there are business operation risks. That is, when you're closed down, you can't do any business. That costs a lot of money because you are board members, you are running businesses. Reputational risks, you know, the negative public image for the city is not just negative public image. You will lose a lot of investments because investors will say this place is not serious, they will go to other cities. Other investors who were already here, they will leave because they will believe that we are not serious about as an entity, you're not serious about your assets and you're not a serious entity. Legal compliance risk, everybody knows that when you're attacked, you will have fines. You'll have people suing you. We are very lucky in South Africa that we are not a litigious community. I haven't heard anybody being sued. There hasn't been a class action, but in the US, when you are attacked, the first thing you are sued by the individuals whose information you have compromised. And the authorities are going to punish you. And the banks, I'll talk about who we are at risk when we are being attacked. So far, we are still fine, but I always say things start in the US and they come here. And it's going to come. And it's not going to be long before you have to pay heavy penalties. In terms of the statistics, it is said that the average cost of an attack is about 56 million. And you're talking about small entities, but as a city, it should be more than that. Just quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the types of threats and what motivates them. We know financially, people are looking for money. All this data is sold in the dark web, and it's good money for those people. I mean, the criminals now no longer have to put balaclavas and scale. I mean, they sit and then they get your information and they sell it. But at the city, I think the bigger risk is your own employees who are not happy, and especially those that have got access to your data, to information. And most of these threats of disgruntled employees are employees who have already left the organization. And then they come in, and I mean, some have messed up with their organizations where they could not operate for almost a month. So it is very important that you look at your systems and make sure that you are protected. Next slide. The types of cybersecurity that you're looking at, you've got intentional, I spoke about intentional ones, who are actually, my apologies. I'm using paper, which I'm not used to. You must remember, this is a Magogo who's been like digitized, so paper to me, I'm not used to. So you have got intentional ones. I spoke about disgruntled employees and cyber criminals. I spoke about that. But for you as a city, the most important ones are your internal ones, the people who don't know what they are doing, and hence training. I'm talking to the boards now and the executives of these entities. You must train your people to understand so that they know what the risks are and they actually protect the organization. But the biggest threat globally are your suppliers. Criminals are not going to come to the city because they know the city is protected. They'll go to just your suppliers. One example is a company called Target. That's your retail. You imagine your Checkers or, in the US. How were they attacked? They were attacked through an air conditioning company. I mean, when you look at an air conditioning company, the cybersecurity procedures there are limited, but they had to spend $300 million US after that attack. So it is important that you put procedures and policies and protect the entity via the service providers. It's very, very important. Next slide, I'm not going to be talking about this because we know there are professional criminals, petty criminals, and you have got those lone hackers that just want to boast that I looked at the information of the executive mayor, boasting about whatever. The next slide, I think this is very important. This is the slide that I believe that each entity must look into this, the methods of attack. Everybody must understand this particular slide because how you are attacked, you need to know. The first one is very easy, phishing. Everybody knows about phishing. By raising your hand, people who understand phishing. Yeah, okay, good. And then there's spear phishing. Those that understand spear phishing? Okay, spearfishing, if you can imagine Shaga with the spear. Those people know you. They've looked at you. They know what you respond on. They know that you respond this way to your kids. They will pretend they are your kids. They know you respond this way to your bosses. They'll pretend they are your boss. They'll send an email. You'll open it, and they are in. They will destroy the whole city, not just you. I'm not going to talk about these two, but the last one, tailgating, is people who literally, they just get into the organization and get whatever information they want. And I'm telling people now, because I didn't know this a year ago, that your receptionists, and not just receptionists, I've given them a cybersecurity term that say they are chief access officers, because everything goes through them. And the security people, those are the very important people. Have you trained them? Do they know the risks? Because that's how people get in and access your information. They pretend they're coming to do whatever. They've observed you, and they know what is easy to get in. So it's very important that you train the people who access information, your cleaners. The people who are cleaning your offices, they have got access everywhere. Have you trained them? These are the important things. Then you have got a situation, I think you had the same situation a few years ago at the city, where the criminals just flood your system. And when I was studying the cybersecurity, and I spoke to Aubrey, I had a difficulty understanding these terminologies, because people will say DDoS. I said, please, talk to me. I'm a layman. So I'm going to talk to you like I am asking cybersecurity people to talk to me. When the criminals are flooding your system and you can't get in, it's called the distributed denial of service, or DDoS. Mostly they will ask for money, ransomware. Now, most advanced organizations, they've got their backups. They will bring the information back and the system will run, but criminals now have got a better way of messing you up. They will just publicize the information on internet. They'll threaten to do that. You have no option but to actually pay them. So it's very important that you protect yourself, because certain information is so confidential, you do not want it to be on the net. Then the third one is the most riskiest one, because people steal your voice, they steal your face, so they pretend they are you, and you can either get a phone from Landu or from your CFO. And in this case, actually, it happened in Hong Kong. There was a video conferencing. The CFO is sitting there and talking to this financial manager. At the end of the day, instruction, pay $25 million US. Yeah, it was paid. But there was no CFO. There was no meeting. It all was fiction. So deepfake is the most dangerous, because you could have your boss talking to your boss, and there is no boss. They've just stolen his voice, his face. So it is very, very important to understand these things, and the concept of zero trust. Don't trust anything that's online. And then you have got what is called the advanced persistent threats. These are big guys, you know, your China, your US, Russia, Iran. These guys have got money. They will sit in your system for months, observing anything, stealing information, doing whatever crazy thing they want to do. You'll only know after some time, you know. And I made an example of SolarWinds, you know, where they messed up so many people. Any organization that's international that you know about was hacked by that. And they hacked about 80% of the Fortune 500. And the US, all the departments were affected. The White House, everything. So these are the guys who sit and watch and destroy not just you. In this case, and I spoke about service provider, SolarWinds was a service provider of all these entities. So by pressing a button, updating the system, all of those entities were affected. Then the one I like most is about the Sony hack. Sony, they were going to be releasing a movie called The Interview. I don't know if some of you saw The Interview. Okay, people from the North Korea didn't like this because it was showing their boss being blown, and they actually said, please do not release this movie. And then come FBI, and FBI say, we do not talk to terrorists. Let's continue with this release, right? This guy said, fine. Then they released 5 movies that have not been released yet. I mean, that's a multi-billion losses. And then they released the information of everyone. And then they also released emails, you know, gossip, people talking about celebrities. It was a mess. The millions of US dollars that were paid by Sony Pictures International, it is unbelievable. So I am trying to emphasize in this slide that protect the entities, protect yourself, make sure. I used to believe that cybersecurity belonged to the IT people, and it's you know, it's a cost center. After this course, I am saying cybersecurity is what is it? Revenue protection center. Because when you're attacked, you pay a lot of money. Okay, I'm not going to talk about brute force because it talks to people guessing your password. There's still people who have got password called password, 1, 2, 3, 4. But today, anyway, because of artificial intelligence, the passwords are broken in seconds. So that's why you've got this something called the multi-factor authentication. So you can see people sending OTPs. That's because now passwords really are useless. You can have it, it's important, but when somebody wants to break it, they can. Now, I think the next slide also is quite important, the governance. And this is where the board members, it's very, very important. I'm talking about the structures, you know, governance structures. You have the board of directors, you ladies and gentlemen. The risk committee, in some cases, they've got risk and audit. Now, most of the delegation of the security are in the risk committee. So policies, cybersecurity policies, and everything that must be done by the organization must be known by this committee. The executive committee also must monitor what's going on. Your chief information officer is the champion of the security. Then the governance processes, this is where each entity must spend a lot of time. And I have been asking the chairs, because I speak to the chairs of organization, and some of the organization are listed companies that I spoke to. I asked, do you have an enterprise information security policy? None of them have. I don't know if you do have here board members. By show of hand, any of you have got this, have approved this policy? You see, I also am guilty of that. But it is important to have that. And then the cybersecurity culture is very important. And I must emphasize, I'm not going to deal with each and every point here. I must emphasize the fact that when people have made a mistake, allow them to report. That's transparency. Because if you are punishing those that are saying, I've made a mistake, or those that are saying, I've seen something wrong, then you will never get into the proper cybersecurity culture. Because those people are important to show you your vulnerabilities so that you can protect them. Formal communication channels are very important. People must know when something strange is happening online, who do I talk to? Then I'm going to look at the CFO. I haven't seen the CFO. It is important that there's adequate funding for the cybersecurity. There's something called, we all know the return on investment. In cybersecurity world, it's called return on mitigation. Now, if you did not spend money on this system or this particular part of the entity, how much will it cost you when we are criminally attacked? When cybersecurity attack comes, how much will it cost you? So you have to weigh the cost versus the benefit, and that's sitting in finance. I'm not going to talk a lot because some of the work has to go down, deep down into the entities. The talent management, the cybersecurity skill is very, very challenging the world over. There's a shortage of 4 million cybersecurity professionals the world over. So managing that talent is quite important. I had a chat with your head of IT, Mr. Aubrey. At least the entity has got enough support around. They've sourced some of the services. So I am satisfied that they are on the right track. Then your training, that, as I said, from the board chair to the person who is a reception, to the cleaners, everybody in the in the entities is responsible for knowing and for being trained so that they know what they are dealing about. Next slide, I'm not going to be talking much about these slides because they talk more to the entities. And we're going to move to the slides where it talks to legal risk because I think this is very important. Okay. Here in the country, we've got the Cybercrime Act, the POPI Act, and the ECT Act. There are many other laws that are talking to protection of information. But if any of the citizens from the European Union are part of your customers, please get your legal people to be very, very cautious because those, the General Data Protection Regulation from the European Union protects its citizens anywhere in the world. And the penalties are unbelievable. Facebook, I'm sure all of us know Facebook, they've paid a penalty of $1.3 billion because of that law. I've just read that Uber just paid about $340 million. I'm not going to go to detail about what and why, but it is important that your legal department is very familiar with the laws, with the cybersecurity laws of those countries if part of your clients come from the European Union. How do you mitigate legal risks? Then I spoke about suppliers, third party. You know, it is very important to manage them. There must be committees to manage those third parties to ensure that they are also complying with the cybersecurity protection. They actually protect your company, and there must be committees and there must be agreements that make sure that cybersecurity in all your agreements is part of the agreement with your service providers. And also, you're looking at your licenses, at your insurance. Make sure that you are insured. I know that the city is looking at insurance. It can be quite expensive, but it is better to insure, and each entity will have to look at how it is insured, because 13 entities are quite vast and different. Now, I think the last part that I must talk about is the incident response plan. I think this is very, very important. You know, I ask every time, that is, what are the chances of this building or any building there that you are in catching fire? And the chances are very low, but all of us know that we have to do fire drills. I'm correct, right? Sorry, I can't say I have to always do this. We all do fire drills. But the second question I ask, what are the chances of your entities being attacked criminally by cyber criminals, sorry? It's 100%. You will be attacked. It's a certainty. It's a matter of when, and it's a matter of the impact. But have you done the cyber drill? Have you done that? And the answer is usually no. And if you do not have that plan, and if you've not simulated all these incidents that I mentioned earlier, you are in trouble. Just going to you have to be proactive, That is, you prevent, you plan, and you prepare. I'm not going to go too much into detail in that because each entity will have to do its own plan, which must be approved by the board. And I have not seen in my life of more than 25 years sitting in boards and chairing audit committees, I've not seen that plan. And I don't think I'm alone. And it has to be detailed, and it has to be explaining what will be done when the attack comes. Reactive, you look at detecting. I mean, these now are going to be done by the likes of your Aubrey. The technical people will detect when you are attacked. They will detect where is the attack. They will analyze them. And I think the only thing I want to talk about is the slide where it talks about communication. If we can move to the slide, because for me, that is the most important slide for the leadership that I'm standing in front of. So you must have an approved communication plan. And secondly, you must have the communication team. Who is part of that team? Your CEO, your CFO, because the CFO will have to sign the checks, because when you're attacked, you have to pay money. And these criminals are not asking for cash, they're asking for bitcoins. And usually they'll come at the most inconvenient time, maybe Friday afternoon. If there is a CFO here or anybody who's managing money, do you know where to get the bitcoins on Friday afternoon? So this is now about preparing. You know, you must know what is the policy? Is the policy of the city to pay or not to pay? Those are the things that are important. You have your legal person, you have your communication leader or communication officer, and of course, your team of the cybersecurity, your IT people, must be in that team for the preparation of the incidents. And then your key external stakeholders. This is where most companies lose a lot of money, about how you communicate, who do you report to, and especially the media. What do you say to the media? Never lie. And when to talk to the media is critical. You know, those are the things that in the plan are part of how you're going to protect your entity when now you are attacked. Internal stakeholders. When there's an attack, does everybody know in the organization what to do, who to talk to? And remember, the media is going to call anyone. And now, what does everyone say from the entity? This is very critical. I think my last take on this is just to give you a scenario. And it's important that you all participate in this scenario. Imagine you are a CEO of an airline company, which is an international company owning about 5,000 planes. And at any point in time, 1,000 are on the air. And all of a sudden, boom, everything is dark. The pilots cannot see where they are. People on the ground, they can check in, nobody can do anything, it's just black. What would you do? That's the assignment we're given. Now the answer, it doesn't matter. If you did not do the simulation, your organization is finished. Because one, some planes were about to land, and now they can't. And they don't even know, they probably will hit other planes because they don't know where they are. Some had no fuel, they were just about to land. So somebody's going to die, you know. And it's, what the emphasis is about simulation, practice, practice, practice. If you did not know, if you did not practice that incident, your organization is finished, because the penalties that you're going to be paying for people suing you, because some planes are going to fall, people are going to die, and the inconveniences. There has been an outage a few months, I think 2 months ago, from CrowdStrike, where the whole world, this is a cybersecurity company, just because there were no procedures, policies, I believe, somebody put out an update that messed up with anyone who was depending on Microsoft, the whole world. Now, one airline is suing that company $500 million US, just one organization. Airports were closed. I know Heathrow was closed. Many companies, Capitec was affected as well here in South Africa, and one airline here in South Africa was affected. All I'm just saying is that practice, just like you practice your fire drill, practice these scenarios so that when you are attacked, because you are able to respond accordingly. I think I had to summarize this presentation because of the time and because I can even hear some stomachs rumbling. So I literally, I know that the entities will have to go through each of their own risks and also each of their own protection measures. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Manasseh. I think the issue of cybersecurity is very important and we need to attend to it. But I've learned the following. One, the new phrase, the return on mitigation, which is important that we can save a lot of money from the city if we really mitigate cyber threats. The second thing is those that, actually the MMC of Finance is here. We need budget to be allocated for cybersecurity. And we need to appreciate that the risk of the security attack is quite high and it has devastating outcomes if we do not attend to it. Do you have any questions? I've got one. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Program Director. Good afternoon, everyone. Our entity has developed a strategy to go cashless in an attempt to move closer to achieving the smart market strategy. So the question would be, what policies can we put in place to ensure that we secure our customers' data without compromising the speed and agility of our cashless system? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a question from Sipho Mhlambi. While they are bringing the mic, I think we can take Andile Mnyaka.
Thank you, Group Head. A very informative presentation by Mrs. Manasseh. I think given the fact that we are a highly regulated environment from governance point of view and as well as the city, what I take as a key takeaway from the presentation is the regulation of information and the management of it. And I think what I would have taken from the presentation is that it seems as though it's inevitable that you will be attacked, and therefore the financial implication is there. But surely one of the mitigation issues or factors could be that of the management of information through backup systems and some protection measures, as and when you are attacked, you do have backup of that information to the extent that at least you do not have that financial loss. But of course, because of the sensitivity of the information, I think you would then obviously have to take out those Bitcoins. So my question to Umamu Manasseh then would be, from an information management point of view and the policies that can be implemented, could that be the key and critical cog to ensure that you mitigate this cybersecurity attack as and when they happen? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to take you, Sipho, and then allow Manasseh to come and respond to these questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Manasseh, and appreciate the presentation. I think mine is hopefully a simple question. As much as we want to move towards the simulation part as a mechanism in preparing for potential threats that may eventually manifest, how does an entity or the city balance the need to, or at least the drive to want to do penetration testing of our system while still wanting to at least safeguard against potential threats that maybe we might be inviting by allowing either external parties or service providers to come and test our system through the penetration testing? Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, you can come and respond to the questions. Thanks.
Thank you. There are 3 questions, and I'm very impressed that your entity is cashless, which is where everybody should go. And the cashless and the whole issue of being in the space, in the digital space, of course, attract a lot of interest from cyber criminals. Each entity is different. I cannot stand here and say you must do this or not do that. But your protection is your responsibility. As the more you are digital, the more protection you must have. There is no, something you take from the shelf and put it there. Somebody must come, and I know that the city has outsourced the cybersecurity, and it's got quite good experts who could come and give you exactly what you need to do. So I cannot sit here and tell you what you do. What I will tell you is that make sure you protect yourself, because even if you protect yourself today, remember that cyber criminals are improving every day. So it's an ongoing protection, especially the more cashless and more digital you are. And I think I'll also talk to the last question about service providers and penetration testing. It is something that is necessary because you need to be ready. There's always a risk with your service providers. There's always a risk with cybersecurity because it is they call it a black box, because you cannot see what people are doing. You just rely on what they are saying. But it will not stop you from actually doing those tests, penetration tests, and it could be a risk because you do not know. There are cases where you have got employees who are fully deployed by the criminals to work for you, and they're sitting right in your systems. So the only thing is training, being up to date. I spoke about zero trust. There are many concepts about zero trust. And I must also say, because of time and because of the diversity of all of you standing here, I could not go deeper. It's very high level. If entities are interested, then I could go and dive into that particular entity, because you have to talk to that particular entity. The one that came from, is it Andy Lemnyaka, about mitigation. Everybody has to do mitigation. Recovery, backup recovery is one of the most important mitigation. But as I said to you earlier, even if you can recover your systems, criminals can still do a lot of damage to you because they can still put everything online. So yes, that is your baseline, to have backup systems so that you can recover the system. Remember, recovering systems that have been destroyed is not automatic. Some take some time. I mean, we just recently have in your national lab services, were attacked just recently, I think in June, where the blood tests could not be done because systems were down for a long time, actually. So people were dying because it took time to recover the information because doctors were operating without blood results. And it's just not South Africa alone. I just read that in the UK, the same thing happened. At least here, I believe that that has been recovered. In the UK, I'm told that it takes 6 months to get your blood results. You know, so I am saying to you, mitigation happens, but it depends what information is there and how long it is to recover the systems. So I agree with you, backup is important, but also the criminals are getting clever all the time, and they are getting better and better. I think, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. I've got a situation now. Okay. We're supposed to break for lunch, but one of our colleagues who was supposed to present 2 presentations is facing some challenges, is unable to be here, which then it means we are left with 1 presentation from CRAM. So I want us to agree. Can we take this presentation and we break once? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ma'am Manasseh. You can take your seat. Ndim ndodwa apha eqongeni endizibambileyo. Yabagxotha bonke abantu. With your permission, I would like to invite any EDs, please do not leave. We're about to finish. I would like to invite the team that assists Sipho Mhlambi, that sits in our board meetings and subcommittee meetings, that does your assessment so that you have an appreciation of who are those people that the city has deployed in entities to assist you as the board. Mhlambi, please come up with your team. Andile, where is Funeka? Where is Dumi? Stanley, why? Oliphant? Who's phone? Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Sipho to introduce his team and inform you who supports which entity. Thanks, briefly.
I'm going to take the prerogative. I think I've spoken at length today. These are the colleagues that support me and the group head and the city manager, represent the shareholders. So I'm going to allow each and every member to introduce themselves and tell you where and who they're going to support.
Good afternoon. My name is Boitumelo Malebia. I'm Deputy Director responsible for the Governance Cluster. I support the Group Advisory Committees and MMC Finance. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Standiwe Kumalo. I'm responsible for Sustainable Services Cluster, which I've got my 2 colleagues. Unfortunately, they are not around, which is Tinsma Lumane and Kia Muhet. Kiabetswe. Ngiyaxolisa. Yes, we support sustainable services, Joburg Water, City Power, and Pick It Up, and Joshko. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Malifi Oliphant. I look after Metrobus and JRA, and also my primary cluster is HSD, which we look after JCPZ and JCT. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Sinovuyo Magengenene. I'm Officer of the Unit Head. I support the Unit Head and the entire team. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ungobizita Hluzane. I'm Assistant Director for the HSD cluster, and I support JCT and JCPZ. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Andile Miyaka, Assistant Director, HSD Cluster, supporting JCT and JCPZ. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Stanley Pashe. I'm under the Economic Growth Cluster, led by Ms. Magagula. I support MTC and JDA as an Assistant Director. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Funeka Magagula. I support the Economic Growth Cluster. The Economic Growth Cluster is comprised of the three portfolios, which is transport, economic development, as well as development planning. And with me, I have my two team members, Stanley and Felicia, will introduce herself. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Felicia Matipa under the Economic Growth Cluster, and I support Joburg Market and Joburg Tourism.
Thank you very much. I thought this is important so you know the team that is supposed to assist you, and they know their responsibilities. They should not be in any competition with the board members. You are the sole executive authority, but they are there to others are disturbing us. They are there to protect the interest of the shareholder and ensure that the shareholder value is not eroded. They are here to support you, and by the way, they are well qualified. I think on average, it's masters here. That's what we have in the city of Johannesburg. Thank you very much. And lastly, I'm asking for your indulgence whilst they are connecting for the next presenter. Samantha Patha, please come through with your team quickly. That's the team. Look, you can see diversity. So Samantha is leading Shareholder Services Unit. She's our host. I'm just the leader. And I had the privilege to be just the program director. But this is the team that is assisting me. It is Samantha and her team that have put together this program, and I believe they've fully delivered it. So Samantha is the head of Shareholder Services. Again, she's your boss. She's the one who's responsible for the recruitment of the NEDs and the IACs. She's the one that assesses your performance at the end of the year. And she's the one that recommends whether we need to retain you or retire you, depending on your performance. And she's also responsible for AGMs and the governance forums with the team. Thank you very much, colleagues. I thought that they should see you who delivered this. It's not me. I was just providing guidance. Thank you very much. You can take this. Then, up next, we have the dynamic Miss Liziwe Makoro, or as many know her, Mama Action. A name well earned for a heads-on approach and getting things done. an operator, a strategist of note, and a committed civil servant, and she's known across the regions of the city. Today, she will be presenting on the development of an integrated service delivery framework. An integrated service delivery framework approach is crucial in the advent of serious service delivery challenges as outlined by the city manager, the MMC finance, and the executive mayor, such as the infrastructure backlogs in all the utilities, declined revenue collection that leads to the budget constraints, and the new normal for service delivery. Therefore, CRAM plays a vital role in ensuring efficient citizen engagement and service delivery, making sure the needs of the public are met swiftly and effectively. Please join me in welcoming our Mama Action, Udia, Undungwane, Umapejula, Miss Lizzie Wemakor. Thank you.
The function itself has evolved over years. The function itself has evolved over years in that it used to be solely responsible for coordination, integration, and facilitation of service delivery by the different entities and departments. In the recent years, we have seen the inclusion of a function which is called augmented service delivery. This function was introduced with the sole purpose to improve the response of the entities to service delivery that we need to provide to the communities. Primarily, the department itself, it exists to provide that coordination at regional level and be the face of the city by also monitoring and evaluating the performance and the quality of services that the entities that you'll be looking after are responsible for. It's quite a dynamic model that we have in the city of Johannesburg, in that, as indicated by my colleagues, from the establishment of the entities during the EGOLI 2000 model, the regions, the citizen relationship and urban management function was introduced to drive and lead the regional governance function of coordination at regional level. By doing that, we are to become, as expected, the link between the communities and the entities representing the city of Johannesburg. We are to facilitate the responsiveness in an integrated manner by the different entities to solely respond to the needs of the communities at grassroots level. The CRAM department is represented by regional directors that are in the 7 regions that we have. The regional directors also have allocated to the regions MMCs who are oversight MMCs who are supposed, if it's possible, I don't know if there's water. Oh, there. The regional directors are supported by MMCs that are allocated to the different regions, solely to provide the support and oversight over the responsibility that we have as the city, which is to deliver on the services. The regional directors have got structures that they have introduced in the different regions solely to also promote the integration of the service that we offer to our communities. These are the platforms that when I discuss with Mr. Mlandu, I say it is important that each entity should find expression in the different regions, and each entity needs to understand and become part of the integrated service delivery approach and framework that the city has. Instead of me highlighting how CRAM works together with the different entities, I will do so by highlighting the main functional areas that we look at as the CRAM department. As the name suggests, which is Citizen Relationship and Urban Management, we have a responsibility to build and manage coordination and integrated regional governance, and promote active citizen engagement and participation. What that means, this is now to the board of directors. What this means is that when there's heat on the ground, when there are protests on the ground, when there are concerns around the service and the standard and quality of the service that we provide, the first people to feel that heat are the regional directors that we currently have spread out across the city. What then becomes important is the need for us to work together with them and promote the integration of work and efforts by your respective entities to the work that is being done at regional level. The regional directors as well, with the responsibility that is entrusted upon them, they have platforms where they actually bring councillors at regional level to reflect on the state of service delivery. So if one wants to check who is the heartbeat of service delivery, it's the Citizen Relationship and Urban Management function. Because we equally have a responsibility, whilst bringing the interests and needs of the communities to the attention of the departments and entities of the city, we have a responsibility to also support yourselves in making sure that we are responsive to service delivery in the manner in which we deliver on those. In respect of the urban management function that we have as CRAM, it basically talks to promoting a positive and friendly use of the city's public space and socio-economic facilities, and promoting service delivery integration, coordination, and cooperation across the different entities. What is it that we look at? When an entity as JCPZ fails to cut the trees at the time at which it is scheduled to cut the trees, the pressure is felt at the regional level. We in turn go around and partner with the entities that you are responsible for and facilitate the education of communities in respect of them understanding how the city operates. We drive specific interventions as a collective with the entities that you represent in terms of responding to the dire needs of our communities. We also have a responsibility to address the ever-increased lawlessness that is currently taking place in the city of Johannesburg. So some of the information and state of service delivery that one has to deal with as part of CRAM, these are documented and made available to yourselves, hoping that the entities and the departments would plan accordingly and budget accordingly in response to those service delivery needs. Coming to augmented field services, which I think brought in a different spin to what the department was about. Augmented field services was established primarily to promote and support the entities in terms of them being responsive to service delivery needs. So in cases where some of the entities have got capacity constraints, the city has put in place a workforce that is regionally based, ward-based, that is accessible to all the entities in a case they wish additional support or areas to be augmented as part of promoting service delivery. I'm going to try and skip this. Hopefully, at least I've touched on the core mandate of the department and how that is aligned to yourselves. Let me now talk about the integrated service delivery model that the city has. We've got group governance function that is responsible for supporting the entities and the governance structures in respect of management of service delivery agreements that you would have signed with yourselves. We are the foot soldiers on the ground that feed into the actual performance and validation of the information that is submitted by the various entities. So those SDAs prescribe service delivery standards that are supposed to be met by yourselves as the different entities. CRAM is on the ground and responsible for monitoring the actual performance and responsiveness of the different entities in line with the service level standards that have been set by the City of Johannesburg. We work very closely in doing this with the depots. So what it means is that failure for a depot to execute or deliver on its mandate aligned to that particular entity, the noise that you will hear first will be from the regions. Because our responsibility is to make sure that we are responsive and well-structured and we truly address the issues as raised by the communities. So it's much more regionally based, the model that we have, and it is important that as the upcoming board of directors, we actually take cognizance of the existence of the regional service delivery arrangements in the City of Johannesburg. I don't want to stand in front of yourselves and not acknowledge the fact that we have challenges. I'm sure Mr. Mlandu, when there are problems, financial constraints, movement of budgets, he knows very well where we first realize the pressure or the heat as the City of Johannesburg. So it's very important that we have structured relations with yourselves through the governance unit of the City of Johannesburg. And we are able to escalate and provide a comprehensive view on the state of service delivery across the City of Johannesburg. The problems that we've had in the past since the establishment of the different entities is the incoherence in responsiveness and resolution of service breakdowns. You find that within a particular entity, the level of performance varies from one region to the other. Of course, because of varying reasons, you find that you will have one entity that is performing much better than the other, and at the same time, we are unable to provide a comprehensive view on the actual state of service delivery. When we realized these challenges that also were pointed out by research that was done in 2021 and 2022 in the city, where most of the respondents, it's a citizen satisfaction survey, the communities that we serve registered a lot of dissatisfaction in respect of responsiveness by the city of Johannesburg to the needs that are on the ground. This basically pointed us to the need for us to align and better integrate the type of services that we do. The current interventions that we've looked at as the city, that I have received tremendous support from the governance unit, was the introduction of service level agreements. These were signed by the city manager, I think, towards the last quarter of the financial year, which was around January this year. The service level agreements have been signed with 5 of the entities that we have. Those entities are JRA, City Power, Johannesburg Water, Pick It Up, and JCPZ. Why did we feel the need of having service level agreements whilst we have service delivery agreements that are signed at governance level? What we're trying to improve is service delivery through mainstreaming of service resolution value chain. The SLAs in particular are designed such that we upscale the administrative relationships and alignment that needs to exist between the different entities and the regions on the ground. You will note that the current model that we have, you will have City Power with their depots and the depots accountable to their head offices, heads of administration. The SLAs, in a simplified version, seek to promote a much better relationship and integration and communication that needs to take place at regional level. It outlines the different roles and responsibilities of the different parties in respect of servicing the communities, of course, in line with the SDAs that have been signed between the entities and the city. It also talks and formalizes areas of reporting that, if one looks at it differently, this is the same information that would be quite useful to yourselves in terms of validation of the actual performance of the different entities on the ground. Without having to go deeper onto the provisions of those formalized relationships, the entities serve as service delivery agents to the regions. So what we are trying to streamline is the reporting of that performance, in that the regional directors need to be signing off the reports that get presented to yourselves as the people that are on the ground that are able to validate the actual performance of the entities. It's talking to areas of accountability and responsibility by the respective entities. The details of the signed SLAs will be made available to yourselves, I'm sure, by our colleagues from group governance, where the details of the agreements would have been specified. It also proposes an administrative process seeking some level of accountability at regional level. As much as the depots are expected to report to the head offices through to the MDs and to the boards, it becomes important that there should be some level of accountability and sign off by the regional directors. The details of that, as I've indicated, will be made available to yourselves. On sign-off of those SLAs, we then realized that there was little or no effort from the entities to actually translate or communicate the provisions of those SLAs to their regional departments. We then brought in the governance unit, hence we were invited here today. The idea was the inclusion of a KPI into the MDs and CEOs scorecard that specifically specifies the need for them to attend to the issues and provisions of the SLA. I will leave it upon my colleagues as governance to assist us in making sure that the signed SLAs are actually implemented across the various regions in order to improve performance and accountability. We have also, I'm sure it's known to yourselves if you are also the citizens of the city of Johannesburg, it is known to yourselves that there's often complaints with regard to the feedback that communities are to receive, especially on service breakdown concerns, CAPEX projects and progress that the city is making based on the commitments that we would have made during our IDP and CBP processes. We are currently working towards developing a single service delivery platform, assisted by our colleagues, Group ICT, and we will be having entity by entity engagements before that system is rolled out across the city. Basically, the system is looking at assisting us with service delivery reporting, where the information would have been verified by the respective regional foot soldiers. It introduces automated reports for service delivery metrics. It reports and identifies regional performance management per entity. It produces data systems that you could use to compare the level of performance across your different teams. It also introduces a community engagement tool that allows the communities to interact with the city on an ongoing basis. And some of the reports that are going to be drawn from that system will have to be shared by yourselves, will shared with yourselves through the governance unit. It introduces real-time dashboard indicators in respect of how we are responding to service delivery challenges and registered breakdowns. On that note, details of the service level agreements and further engagements on the newly developed single service platform will be shared with yourselves so that we are able to align and integrate towards improved service delivery citywide. Thank you very much, Program Director. That brings me to the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Mama Action, for taking the board members and the group advisory committees through the need for the development of the integrated service delivery framework and how then that should be cascaded down to entities and institutionalized accordingly so that we can address the challenges that we have with regard to service delivery. On that note, I'm about to close. I just missed one thing. There is a gentleman that is heading group committees, and that is another lack of secretariat within the group governance. It provides secretariat support to the executive mayor, the mayoral committee, the EMTs, both operational and strategic EMT, as well as the secretariat support to the group advisory committees, the JCs, JPEG, GRGC, Smart City, and Economic Recovery. And that's the gentleman that is heavily involved in that administrative function. That to an extent is frustrating, but he's strong enough to withstand the pressure. And that's Nkosi Khona Zungu. Nkosi, please come forward with your team. Umanzini unyama kaichi uhamba yedwa. Oh, okay. I want to hand over to you to introduce your team who will support quickly.
Thank you very much and afternoon. As the group had indicated, I'm Nkosi Khona Zungu, acting unit head committees. I have Ukanyi, who's my PA, and I've got Umakasi, who's the admin officer, and also Umpumi. Unfortunately, most of our team members did not come because of some commitments. In short, this is this.
Thank you, Manzini. All the best. Sure, thanks. Now I'm closing. I trust that today's discussions have been insightful and inspiring, and that they will strengthen our commitment to governance and accountability across municipal entities. As we have explored today under the theme, enhancing governance through strengthened shareholder accountability, it is clear that each of us has a critical role to play in ensuring that our entities align with the needs of the shareholder, which are the citizens of Joburg. We can continue driving strategic oversight, transparent decision-making, and sustainable outcomes if we can commit to work together. Let's take the insights from today forward as we build a more accountable and responsive city. Let's continue working to serve the city of Johannesburg and its citizens. On that note, I am going to invite Ms. Samantha Patha to come and give us the closing remarks. We call her Aunt Patty of Governance. She heads the shareholder services in the department, which is a group secretariat function with focus on subsidiaries in the form of entities. She leads the company secretaries. Samantha is heading a very important function, which is responsible for the capacitation of the board of directors, performance assessment of the boards, their appointment, as well as the inductions and the AGMs or the governance framework. This is your boss, not me. We thank her for organizing this induction, along with Nkosi Khona Zungu, who is heading group committees. Thank you very much. My power ends here.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I promise I won't be more than a few minutes. I'm sure you're all very hungry at this stage. The Executive Mayor in absentia, MMC Arnolds, City Manager who was here but had to leave for other commitments, chairpersons and members of both boards and group advisory committees, colleagues, very good afternoon to you all. My role this afternoon is a very simple but important one. We would be failing in our closure of this induction without having thanked the many people that made this event possible. We would like to thank Joburg City Theatres for the catering, venue and other logistics. JMPD for the beautiful rendition of their songs. I think we have to give them a round of applause. Group Comms for video graphics and invites. Group IT for streaming on the city's social media platforms. All our proficient speakers for imparting valuable information to our boards and advisory committees in helping them understand their roles and responsibilities in the city. We are truly grateful. Big thanks to Carol, Yolanda, Evan, and Andrea from my team. And lastly, to you, both online and those present, we wish you well on your journey with the city in realizing our world-class status. All presentations that we've had here today will be shared via your company secretaries. We thank you so much once again, and please invite you to join us for lunch and travel safely. Thank you.